welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting over Episode 4 of Neon Genesis Evangelion. If you'd like to watch along, start watching now. So last we left off, Shinji had fought the fourth angel, and he really went out of his way to save Kensuke and his friend. And this was notable because they had been pretty rotten to him before. The last scene, I believe, was Toji attempting to call Shinji and try and apologize, but I don't know if we ever got any confirmation on that. So it seems like Misato's been somewhat negligent of Shinji, considering how he cleaned out his entire room. So clearly Misato doesn't want to let the cat out of the bag. I guess to Kensuke and Toji's credit, they were going to check up on Shinji. So, cutting to Shinji, he's listening to his cassette player, as he frequently does, and he's on a train heading somewhere. And it seems like he's writing about as far as possible, considering these cuts showing fewer and fewer people on the train. And interestingly enough, Shinji seems to be listening to the same track repeatedly. I don't know if there's any significance to that, but that's just something I noticed now. So Shinji's so lost he almost doesn't seem to notice that he's reached the end of the line. So I guess for want of anything better to do, he's decided to go to a movie theater. It's got like a couple making out, a guy who's passed out, and then like a homeless guy, presumably. So I guess the point of that is to sort of show the isolation Shinji's going through, where the only people he can even sort of relate to are either off in their own world or are just down and out. I'm wondering if this is sort of some stress-induced hallucination kind of thing. I wouldn't think that would be too out of bounds for something like Evangelion. So we get another little quick insight into Misato. So rather than doing anything proactive, she just sort of checks in to see if Shinji's happened to return. Which, of course, he hasn't. It's a shame because at least she wants to do what's best for Shinji, and that's a good place to start. But she doesn't really put any meaningful action into it. So, to her credit, she's at least sort of complaining to Ritsuko about it, about how it's not really fair what they're putting Shinji through. But Ritsuko mentions that for one reason or another, the pilot has to be 14 years old to pilot it. Presumably there are technical reasons, but those aren't expanded upon. So I guess we're getting a little more insight into why Shinji ran away in the first place. Misato's really laying into him. And granted, she does raise a fair point, but at the same time, I don't think she's really taking into account the entirety of the situation. So interestingly enough, Kensuke is the one to find Shinji. He'd sort of dressed himself up in fatigues and was playing around in a field, and Shinji just happened to wander through there. So Shinji and Kensuke have a neat little conversation here, and the difference in their two perspectives are really apparent. But interestingly enough, Kensuke lets slip that he's sort of in the same situation as Shinji is, in that he doesn't have a mother. Of course, with some things being the same, Kensuke is much more, I guess, eager to pilot an Evangelion than Shinji is. So some men in black suits from Nerve have caught on to Shinji, and they are not especially happy, it looks like. So Shinji looks like he's being held in a holding cell of sorts. And Misato comes to check up on him, but it seems like their relationship is still kind of rocky. Shinji sort of resigns himself to piloting the Evangelion just because it would be unseemly to make Rei handle all the work. So ultimately, Misato snaps at him, somewhat understandably, but I really don't think that was the most practical thing to do in this situation if you truly don't have the pilots that you need. So, since Shinji's made up his mind that he doesn't want to pilot the Evangelion, he's sort of being escorted off Nerve property. Men in black suits are dropping him off at the train station. So Kensuke and Toji show up to meet Shinji, and ultimately Toji offers a proposition. He won't feel better at all unless Shinji punches him. So I guess it's sort of a, maybe rite of passage is too strong a term for it. So it's interesting that they mentioned that they've seen a lot of their classmates leave by the way that Shinji is currently preparing to leave. Toji was also pretty sympathetic about watching him in the EVA the second time against the Fourth Angel. So I guess if only because of this interaction, Shinji is now feeling some trepidation about what he wants to do. Back at Nerve headquarters, Misato and Ritsuko are, I guess, talking things over in relation to Shinji. Even Ritsuko doesn't seem convinced that what's going on is what's ultimately for the best. Which is interesting because she seems to be the most ambivalent towards Shinji out of everyone. Except for maybe Shinji's father. So the train arrives, and tellingly, Shinji doesn't get on it. And he briefly heard somebody say, "Hang in there." And it sounded to me like it was Misato's voice, but she also wasn't at the train station, so it couldn't have been her. Could have just been Shinji's imagination, or a hallucination, or something like that. So Shinji didn't get on the train after all, and he and Misato finally take notice of each other. And taking into account what you said about the hedgehog's dilemma, it seems like the two of them are going to reconcile. So we're sitting here on a still shot of Misato and Shinji just sort of staring at each other. I think that's sort of emblematic of this entire episode, really. Because essentially, the status quo was just restored. Alright, that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means tune in for the next one.